Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for JDC's Coronavirus Update Briefing. We are joined on the call today by Usher Ostrin, JDC's Interim CEO, Amos Levran, Director of External Relations, JDC's former Soviet Union Department, and Galit Sagi, Director of Strategic Development, JDC's Israel Department. They will be sharing updates on JDC's critical work and emergency response during this challenging period. Before we get started, I want to share some technical information with you. You are on mute and we can't see you, so feel free to get comfortable while you listen. As you look around your screen, you should see a function for chat and a Q&A tool. The chat function has been disabled for this call, so we kindly request that you enter your questions or comments in the Q&A tool. All questions are welcome. Please feel free to share your questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll try and answer as many as possible in our Q&A session, which is the last section of the webinar itself. The coronavirus has affected all of us, transferring many of our lives inside. This has physical ramifications, social distancing, quarantine, or self-isolation. Being inside also has psychological ramifications of fear, loneliness, and anxiety. But this notion of going inside has also had positive consequences. Special family moments we will remember and cherish forever as we spend more time together. Social friendships and bonds renewed over WhatsApp, FaceTime, Zoom, and Skype. Individual acts of bravery and kindness by neighbors, friends, and community. Collective public displays of emotion and outpouring of gratitude for our healthcare professionals. And moments of introspection where we look inside ourselves and consider what is really important to us as individuals. Even in the best of times, JDC's clients and the people we serve are vulnerable. With the emergence of the coronavirus pandemic, their struggles have become even more dire. I would like to invite Usher Ostrin, Interim CEO of JDC, to share with us some thoughts. Usher.
Thank you, David. And thank all of you for joining in this call today, and greetings from quarantine in my Jerusalem apartment. I want to begin by thanking our supporters, our funders, and our partners who've enabled this organization to respond to the needs of the Jewish people since 1914. And to thank the Federation system, which has been a steadfast source of support for JDC through crises large and small. Several weeks ago, there was a reprint of an article in Hebrew, a newspaper from 1921. It spoke of an outbreak of typhus in several Jewish communities in Poland at the time that was carried there by 3 Jewish refugees from nearby Ukraine who were fleeing the pogroms at the time. Typhus is a frightening disease, and the disease spread quickly among members of the Jewish community who regularly gathered and shared space at their synagogues, their Jewish schools, Jewish sports clubs, and social organizations. 2 weeks into the outbreak, word reached the JDC offices in Warsaw, and within 24 hours, there were 3 doctors in JDC's employ who were there, and the spread of typhus was halted. We won't stop the spread of corona. That's not the point. The point is that these Jews, among the poorest Jews in the world in their day, had no address, only one address to which to turn for help in their hour of need. In the 100 years since then, and remarkably, including today, JDC has been and is that address for so many. In my career at JDC, I've given hundreds of briefings. Briefings generally involve trying to help haves understand the plight of have-nots. helping someone with a comfortable life who doesn't need to worry about where his or her next meal comes from, or if he or she has enough insulin to last the month, or if there'll be someone to change the bedpans for the bedbound. My charge in these briefings has been to help incredibly warm and generous Jews in Seattle and Scarsdale, in Nashua and Nashville, to understand what it is to live with the fear and anxiety that these Jews far away from us live in every day of their lives. There's something different about my briefings now, because now I'm speaking to people who also experience fear and anxiety. We're all in that state. Every day, we all across the globe wake up to a new reality. There are more restrictions, there are more limitations, and there are more horrific statistics that continue to shock. The virus makes no distinctions between those who give generously and those who have only us to turn to. It's in that spirit that we thought it was important to share with you what JDC is doing now in Ekaterinburg and in Rahat, in Kharkov, and in Yerucham, and so many other places where the needs are overwhelming. The address to turn to is the joint. In a few minutes, you'll hear what our incredible staff is doing, working around the clock to help relieve and alleviate, to help mitigate, and yes, in some cases, even to save lives. Not only in the FSU and in Israel, which we'll concentrate on today, but in Caracas and in Mumbai and in Riga and in hundreds of other cities and scores of other countries where Jews in need turn to the joint. Let's remember that as our staff does this work on the front lines, they do so under the same cloud we all live under. Some work from quarantine with their laptops, either with kids also quarantined underfoot or alone in their own apartments. Others out in the field giving all they have to help those who depend on us. Understanding all the while that any human connection, any connection with another human being carries with it inherent risks. I could go on to describe the exhaustion as decisions need to be made at all hours of the day and night that will affect lives. But there's another dimension that's sometimes lost, and you need to know it because it speaks to what's at stake: the emotional toll. When a member of our staff needs to decide when to stop home care in the interest of saving many lives, other lives will be lost. When you struggle with setting priorities for your time and your budget to help children at risk in these circumstances, or the members of a family that have been broken under the pressure of fresh unemployment and children out of school and have descended to domestic violence, or to direct more resources to people with disabilities who've lost the supports that recently allowed them to live independently. Someone has to make those decisions, and they exact an emotional toll that day in and day out weighs on our staff. I hope that as you listen, you are as moved as I am by their dedication to the people who rely on us. They represent an organization that is grounded in the notion that every human being has inestimable intrinsic value. There is so much basic human unkindness in our societies today. The Joint, since its founding, has tried to be an antidote to that, to provide purpose and meaning to the lives of so many, to give dignity and solace to the downtrodden and the bruised, to create nurturing communities, to make people, all people, the elderly, people with disabilities, the marginalized, the vulnerable, to make so many forgotten or neglected and now under siege, to give them dignity and hope and self-respect by the way the Joint treats them, to reassure them now in the midst of their deepest fears and their most profound anxiety against a mortal enemy they cannot see, to say, we're here for you. Listen to my colleagues talk about how the joint is responding to the new reality created by the pandemic, and see it in that context. I hope you share our pride in their efforts, and that you understand that how what the joint did in Poland in 1921 to respond to an outbreak of typhus, and in so many other times since then, we are doing it yet again. Coronavirus March 2020. This virus will pass. It will leave damage and destruction in its wake. And when it's over, many will have the efforts of these professionals to thank that they made through it. The joint has changed in dramatic ways through the years. Where we work, what we do, and who does it has consistently evolved. But the values, the mission are the same. We are the address for so many Jews who have nowhere else to turn, especially now, and we will help them. We thank you for your time and for helping make this possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asha. As a reminder to everybody, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box on your screen to share them with us. We do welcome all questions and we will try and address them after all the speakers have finished. I'd now like to invite Amos Levran to share some updates from our response in the former Soviet Union. Amos.
Thank you, David, and thanks to everyone for being on the call today and for supporting JDC during these challenging times. JDC has a very significant, vast operation across the former Soviet Union countries, from Russia and Ukraine to Kazakhstan and Moldova. We provide care services to over 80,000 elderly clients who live off of very low pensions, as low as $2 a day. We do this through our network of Chesed welfare centers. Chesed in Hebrew is an act of loving kindness, and these welfare centers do exactly that. They provide the elderly with food, with medicine, with home care, with socialization. We created this Chesed network years ago to meet the needs of the elderly, the poorest Jews in the world. And today we have 64 Cheseds across the region. JDC is also building Jewish life in the former Soviet Union through our network of Jewish community centers, our community programs, and more recently, a focus on capacity building programs, a new youth network, Age 18, active Jewish teens with over 3,200 active teens, a new volunteer movement with over 6,000 volunteers who volunteer on a regular basis, and a young leadership program with over 1,000 graduates by now. We engage approximately 50,000 Jews annually through these programs. So just imagine what a crisis like this means to our operation, what a significant challenge it is, and how we need to adapt, and how we need to respond and respond quickly to the changing needs. Our elderly clients are vulnerable in the best of times, and now they are a focused at-risk population. And the local health services in the countries in which we work are very weak. But we have experience with emergency situations, and we are now operating in crisis mode, but this really is unprecedented. Our strategy is to prioritize life-saving services while minimizing risk to clients and staff. So what's the situation in the former Soviet Union countries today? The responses vary from country to country and even from region to region, but on the whole, if we have to summarize, there are very significant restrictions on public transportation, on public gatherings, on closings of schools, and all of this has a very significant impact on our operations. So how are we adapting? First of all, over 2.5 weeks ago, we already created a crisis team. That means daily of management team, ongoing connection with our field offices and our representatives, ongoing connections with the Cheseds, and closely monitoring the situation. We brought in an emergency medical expert and with him developed emergency protocols that we rolled out to our field offices into the Cheseds. What do they include? For example, mapping risk scenarios, developing emergency organizational structures, mapping the most vulnerable. We're talking about the bedridden, the homebound, the lonely, that in case we will need to prioritize, we will know where they are and how to reach them. And to purchase protective gear. We know there are shortages, just like there are in other places of the world. What adjustments have we made to our services? We're continuing, first of all, critical care, food, medicine, and home care. Home care is where workers provide support inside the home of our neediest clients. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of restrictions with regard to transportation, and we're now looking to address those challenges and to find solutions. When it comes to food and medicine, in the past, we provided food packages. And over the years, we moved on to bank cards, into food cards, which are more like credit cards, allowing clients more flexibility. But with the current crisis, we now need to go back and to provide food packages and Meals on Wheels to the doors of the clients in order to minimize risk, in order to assist clients who can no longer go and buy out independently. When it comes to socialization, in order to protect clients, we halted the activities that require gatherings, our clubs and our day centers, but we are reinforcing call centers, and we are now launching hotlines across the region, hotlines where in Chesed they'll be able to call clients and to receive calls from clients as needed. What about our community programs? Well, when it comes to our Jewish community centers, the in-person activities were suspended, but we're developing online platforms for trainings, for teen activities, for community programs. For example, for the teens, we've developed online courses that include Torah lessons in Judaism, virtual Kabbalat Shabbats, quite a number of them took place just last Friday. And what we're seeing is that the JCCs and Cheseds are initiating a wide variety of online programming. The Teen Club in Chernigov planned many online meetings, including virtual cinema, virtual Kabbalat Shabbat, and they're also planning on providing online meetings for the family club. We just received the plan of the JCC in Kishinev, the online programming plan, which is through May, with 37 online programs, from English lessons, online painting, online Shabbat for families, to Seder Pesach for children, adults, and elderly. And we're mobilizing the volunteer network that I mentioned earlier. We have over 6,000 volunteers on a regular basis across the region. These volunteers today are volunteering mainly remotely, but also where possible, they're assisting with delivering packages to the homes of clients. For example, in Krivoy Rog, volunteers provide assistance for elderly clients by bringing food to their doors. In Lvov, the Volunteer Center created an SOS group where volunteers react to urgent needs. I'd now like to share a few pictures to bring you closer to our work in the field. Tarang, please. Here you see a Facebook post from our volunteer center in Mogilev, Belarus. Volunteers there are doing their best to help elderly clients. They deliver groceries and they go to pharmacy for clients. One of the volunteers is a psychologist and she consults people over the phone. The post says Jewish Volunteer Center, Evreiskaya Volonturskaya Dvizhenia. I'm sure I said it wrong, but it's a call to action. 2 days ago, volunteers brought boxes to our Minsk Jewish campus and they started to collect goods, hygiene items, toilet paper, soap, groceries. And now maybe is a right time to remind us that volonturskaya, volunteerism, is actually a word that doesn't exist in Russian. Volunteerism was not part of the culture. And that just emphasizes how remarkable these volunteer programs are. We'll move on to the next slide now. On the left, you see a volunteer from the Nikolaev Volunteer Center getting matzah from the Chesed before delivering it to an elderly client. On the right is Sophia. She's going to be turning 90 this year. She lives alone in the center of Odessa, and she's a Chesed client. She receives home care assistance and material support, and when she was mobile and her husband was alive, they were participants of the Chesed's Warm Home program for visually impaired because her husband was blind. And what we see is a matzah package that an active Jewish teen volunteer brought to her. We'll move on to the last slide. On the right is Alexander, a 75-year-old Chesed client from Kherson, Ukraine. He has been volunteering for the community for about 2 years. He has a degree in engineering, and he said that he finds it rewarding to now help other community members in need repairing domestic appliances and electric equipment. So you see the vacuum cleaner he repaired for another client of the Chesed, Louisa, who's 81 years old and lives alone. And you see Louisa's home care worker on the left delivering the fixed vacuum cleaner to her. So all of these, thank you, Taran, all of these volunteer activities really are remarkable, and we're really seeing the fruits of our investment in community development from the past few years. What's also really impressive, and I wanted to mention, is that alumni of our Young Leadership programs are launching an online fundraising campaign to help Jewish organizations in crisis. In summary, we're doing our best to adjust services in uncertain conditions, which are really changing rapidly. We'll continue to monitor the situation very closely and to respond. I'd like to finish by thanking all of you. Philanthropic support is what has enabled us to develop the infrastructures, the programs, the staff, the volunteers that are now responding in real time. Without having boots on the ground on an ongoing basis, we would not have been positioned to respond now. Your leadership, your interest, your care, and your support is truly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amos, for those comments. And thank you, everybody, for sending in those questions, which we will get to after we've heard from Galit, who will share some of JDC's responses to the crisis in Israel. Galit.
So, hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. I am very, very happy to be here. And I want to say that this is my third day. Hold on, I think I'm going to close the lines for a second. I just realized that you don't see me very well. There we go. Sorry about that. The working at home is still a challenge. We're still learning this. But I want to start by saying this is my third straight day of presenting what JDC is doing in Israel in different forums. And every single time I am astounded by the number of participants. And I think it's truly amazing that you who are facing your own crises in your communities and you're going through a very difficult time on your own, you still find the time to sit and listen and hear what's going on with the Jewish communities around the world and in Israel. And it's truly touching, and every time from the start. So I really want to start by saying thank you. I am going to share a presentation with you right now that will show a little bit of the pictures and the information of the ground, what JDC is doing to respond to the corona crisis in Israel. And I want to start, I think most of you know who we are and what we do in Israel, but we really target the most vulnerable populations in Israel, the children at risk, people with disabilities, older adults, chronically unemployed, And I wanted to very quickly go through a picture of what's happening to these populations today. So we're talking about the fact that the older adults have suddenly become the most at-risk populations, as in everywhere around the world. They're basically quarantined in their home. We're talking about at least 350,000 of the frailest, poorest elderly, those who normally receive benefits and receive nursing care, who are now in their homes. Their children can't visit them. Their families can't visit them to see if they're okay. In many cases, their home care workers aren't coming. And they are definitely developing new, now that the transportation has been restricted, we think that many of the home care workers won't be there. And this is a huge, huge problem that we see developing. This is also going to be the case with people with disabilities. Many of their home care workers, many of the people who work, who come to people with disabilities in institutions are now not going to be able to come to work. It's going to be a very big problem to people who are dependent. Many of them are confused, don't understand the growing restrictions. And then we have all those who were dependent on special education frameworks that are now closed. I want to just mention the newly unemployed. We have already 657,000 unemployed people in Israel today, where just last week, 1 week ago, we had 80,000. All right, that's almost 600,000 new employed, and we're probably going to reach 1 million by the end of the next week or so. Many of these are not going to have work when this is over. And these are people who up till yesterday were living fine, and now they are at risk, and their families are at risk. So we're talking about many of our clients and many of people who have become our clients that we have to look at. Finally, I want to mention the Arab, Bedouin, and Haredi communities. These are 3 communities where they're, because of a huge lack of trust in the government and its guidelines on the one hand, and in many cases, very weak infrastructure. Many people who do not have internet, who do not have access to other things. These are communities where we're going to see a big problem. We already see of awareness, of understanding of what's going on, and also of compliance to the different restrictions, which poses a great risk to themselves and to others. So this is what's going on with our communities, and the question is, what are we doing? And what are we doing? We can divide it into 3. First, we're trying to continue as much as we can our existing programming, but adapt it to meet the new situation and the emerging needs. We're developing new responses, and we're planning for the day after. And I'll say a bit about each one. So first of all, right away, we try to take everything that we do and make it virtual and make it online. I have to say that in that respect, we were lucky. We didn't think it at the time. About 4 months ago, JDC had to move into temporary offices in Israel. For the first time in 50 years, we're renovating our building, but the temporary offices can only house about half of the people at one time, which means that we had to start learning to work from home. We bought laptops from people, we trained them, we brought in instructional materials, we made mistakes, we learned from our experience. But what that meant was that when this crisis happened and we had to close the offices, we were ready. We were ready to start taking everything online, and within days, most of our programs were online. What you see here in the pictures is a young student who visits her Holocaust survivor that she volunteers with through the cell phone. So they're chatting on the cell phone, and they do so regularly, almost daily. And on the other side, you see a physiotherapist who, for the first time, is providing a PT session online through the web. This is something we started developing community rehabilitation services, and now not only are we taking them to community, we're actually bringing them to people's homes online, something that we're piloting these very few days. In order to do so, we basically created a host of instructional materials, guidelines, webinars, video clips. I just want to say in parentheses that many of these are being translated into English, and we're going to make them available to anybody who would like to, because this is definitely something that we think that as much as we can share our knowledge back and forth, that would be helpful. We also opened up a special website for people with disabilities that's providing information and ongoing support and activities and chat groups and podcasts and so forth, all accessible to every single kind of disability. So that's the first thing that we're doing. We're trying to adapt everything that we can because, as we said, we're serving the most vulnerable. But that's not enough. These days, there are also emerging needs that require new responses. And so one of the biggest new responses that we're doing right now has to do with the older adults. As I said, the 350,000 older adults who are living in their home. So together with the government of Israel, the National Council for Volunteerism, the Schusterman Foundation, and hopefully others, a huge initiative has been launched to provide food and meals to these older adults living in their homes. The government funds this. The National Council for Volunteerism is operating 100,000 volunteers who are actually delivering and providing the food. Now, I just want to say in parentheses, this is something of a huge source of pride for us because the National Council, or the Israel Council for Volunteerism, is actually a program that was born in JDC, an initiative that we ran out of JDC for many years. Just last summer, we scaled it up. We handed it over. It is now an independent organization run by a former JDC employee and a good friend, Ronit Bar. And actually, one of the JDC board members is the chairperson, Amira Levy, of that National Volunteer Council. And today, they're running a huge operation of over 100,000 volunteers with many different organizations providing this food. So what is JDC's specific role? We're helping here because food is not enough. Yes, the government is providing food, but these people are going to need many, many services that the government cannot provide. So together with the Schusterman Foundation, we are now widening the net of assistance. We're going to provide local municipalities with the ability to deliver medicines and to deliver additional food, to deliver additional services that people need, and to provide a call center, and to provide additional care and a hotline to answer questions and activities, and a wider net of basic assistance for those elderly who are now on their own. And that is something which we just yesterday sent out a letter to 140 of the weakest, poorest municipalities in Israel, and we're looking to expand it. And another new response, and I'm just giving one last example, is when we look at the Bedouin sector. When we look at the Bedouin sector in Israel, as I said before, I think that we already today, this is the poorest sector in Israel. These are communities that many of them do not have running water still and do not have electricity on a regular basis. Poverty rates are unbelievably high. Illiteracy is still exists. Polygamy in some cases. This is a population where we already see that compliance rates are unbelievably low. Here, we're using our special convening ability. The government has asked us to convene a special task force on the Bedouin sector. It's an interministerial, intersectoral task force, one that we actually started facilitating and working on a year ago, but is now really focused on the emergency situation, bringing together the NGO sector, people from the Bedouin sector, and all the different government ministries to see how we can increase awareness and compliance within the Bedouin sector, as well as improving their relationships and the working relationship with the government. And we have here examples of we utilize our programs in the field and the infrastructure in the field we have here someone who is providing materials and guidelines and explaining to people about the restrictions, as well as working to volunteer in the hospitals. So these are just examples of new responses that have been come up. And the last thing I want to say is that in addition to maintaining our current programming and developing new responses, and the needs are growing from day to day as the restrictions grow, we always, even as we're scrambling to deal with the current, we have to keep one eye open to what's going to happen in the future. Oh, I forgot something. Hold on. I'm sorry. I'll say a word about that in a second, but we have to keep one eye open for the day after, because the day after is critical. Already today, as I said, we have 670,000 people who are unemployed. The needs are huge and they are growing. We know that that the government, who is already in a deficit, is going to have so many needs to deal with in the day after, and we don't really know when that day after is going to come, but we have to start preparing for it. We have to start running scenarios of what's going to happen. We have to start looking at what's going to happen to our vulnerable populations, and what are the things we have to start working on today so that we will be prepared, we will be up and running as we were already online when the new needs start to happen, when the day after comes. So one of the things we already have begun doing is we've begun reskilling and upskilling, working on programs that will reskill and upskill all those who are unemployed, but that's just the beginning, and we're going to have to do more. One final word, and then I will end. We are not, and we should not be alone in this. There are way too many needs. There are many organizations out there who are already working and helping, and many NGOs who are struggling. So the same way that philanthropists from abroad and from everywhere are trying to help the situation, we also brought together a table of over 40 businesses in order to match the business's desire to help with the NGO sector's growing needs. We're bringing them together, and that table met for the first time yesterday, and hopefully it will continue. So that's a little bit of where we are. I'm going to stop here, and once again, thank you all very much for your support.
Thank you so much, Galit, for your comments.